Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Hello again, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us for this Saturday's edition of Alaska Weather. I'm Dave Percy. Satellite imagery for today shows another cold upper low, the summer of the cold upper low for the southeast coast there, with keeping it cloudy and cool, unsettled conditions, occasionally wet there across the entire area, but lots of sunshine, warm temperatures into the 70s and lower 80s here, especially from the Kuskokwim Valley down in toward northern Bristol Bay this afternoon. Warmest conditions out there, while up to the north, active front passing eastward there, but the main low center passing by to the north toward Banks Island, but the front sagging southward down toward the Brooks Range. Brought some pretty gusty winds earlier today for the along the coast. Central coast seeing gusts as high as 40 miles per hour at times, with 25 to 35 mile an hour winds along and ahead of the front earlier today across the eastern Arctic coast and even the North Slope areas. And then the next system out here coming out of the Russian Far East, already spreading some moisture in across the northern Bering Sea as well as the Chukchi Sea. Otherwise not really showing up that well here, but a lot of low clouds and fog pretty extensive here over the Bering Sea all the way back to the western Aleutians. And on rolling that through again, you can see again the mostly sunny conditions here from roughly the central interior. Had some passing clouds there through the Tanana Valley area in Fairbanks, but the main rain producing stuff well to the north of the Tanana Valley there. And for the chart today, that front coming eastward here to about Kaktovik and then westward, dragging across roughly Cape Lisburne this afternoon with rain along the front and winds diminishing. You can see the gradient really lightening up here. So winds have come down considerably on the western coast, even the central coast now. Area higher pressure there between the more intense storm, 989 millibars, west of Banks Island, and the next system here tracking eastward across the Russian Far East. So just kind of an area higher pressure, definitely lighter wind conditions, but low clouds, fog, rain, and drizzle into the northern Bering Sea. Some of that due to the southwest flow ahead of that next front over the northwest Bering. And then another band of clouds here dropping down into the western Aleutians there for some light rain, fog, and drizzle at Shimia. And again, ceilings 200 feet or so most of the day for the Pribilof Islands. The visibilities 3 to as low as a half mile in fog at times. Otherwise, about that same pattern here for the central Aleutians. Some clearing though for the eastern Aleutian area, especially on the Pacific side of the islands there. That same pattern as you can see here for the Alaska Peninsula. Lots of low clouds, fog on the Bering Sea side. More clearing, a little bit offshore flow there on the Pacific side. Not a bad day for Kodiak Island. Lots of sunshine though for the Kenai Peninsula, Cook Inlet areas. Copper River Basin, Prince William Sound, back to the west into the Yukon Delta actually. And then this surface low here, as well as a low aloft there, again keeping it cloudy and occasionally wet across much of the southeast coast. And for tonight, those showers will be in a decreasing mode situation. Still a chance of showers, but less of it. Maybe some clearing showing up there in some areas, but still a chance of showers, although diminishing chances as the night wears on. No change over the interior, just some mid and high level clouds here from north of the Alaska Range on up. But now the main rain area here, the main frontal boundary back, kind of shifting back to the north along the coast and North Slope areas with a warm front through here, southwest flow, low clouds, fog, IFR to be sure from the western coast through the Bering Strait, in some cases probably even low IFR back towards St. Lawrence Island. Increasing southwest winds again. In fact, probably be a narrow band of gale force winds ahead of this front as it comes across the northern Bering through the Bering Strait and possibly even the Chukchi Sea there. Definitely see some gale force gusts for Cape Lisburne, Point Hope there, especially Cape Lisburne. And otherwise, light westerly flow, low clouds, fog, no change to the Bering Sea, right up to the coastline, lower clouds coming inland a ways anyway, but you can see the gradient really slackens out, so there won't be anything driving it further east yet. And no change also for the Aleutians, as well as the Fox Islands, Alaska Peninsula. Mostly clear, light winds, Kodiak Island, maybe a few clouds. And then for tomorrow, that front drives inland here, the good shot of rain coming with it across the northwest interior to the Brooks Range. Heaviest amounts, southern slopes of the western Brooks Range there, with rainfall extending down across the Yukon Delta with pretty gusty winds, although turning westerly, diminishing behind the front here, but still pretty good, gusting 25, 35 miles an hour here right into the interior for some, probably produce some pretty good turbulence, especially for small aircraft there, with areas of icing as well with this front, and rain spreading eastward. Koyukuk Valley becoming kind of light there, eastern Koyukuk Valley. Could be partly sunny day for the Yukon Flats, but probably more than likely be covered with thick cirrus there. Slight chance of an isolated thunderstorm here along the eastern border from the Wrangell Mountains, northward to or just north of Eagle. But that's just a very slight chance, but the threat does exist. And then showers behind this, or areas of drizzle with really not really cold air coming in behind the front, just a little bit cooler. But that'll pick up a little bit of moisture there as it pushes eastward. And also along the Pacific or the Bering Sea side of the Alaska Peninsula, eastern Aleutians, low clouds, fog, and drizzle. Although the south side, though, like today, you'll see the best conditions, maybe some VFR and sunshine. Should be a mostly sunny day here for south central Alaska, but definitely cooler temperatures, especially into the Kuskokwim Valley, down into northern Bristol Bay. Even cooler here over the eastern Tanana Valley. So kind of a cooling trend starting up, but still into the 70s in many areas for the Susitna Valley, even the Kenai Peninsula. Mostly sunny Copper River Basin, and a mostly cloudy day, maybe some areas of clearing here, but a lot less in the way of shower activity for the Panhandle. That'll probably last into Monday as well. Weak ridging here over the Gulf of Alaska, keeping winds light and variable. Prince William Sound, the North Gulf Coast, and even the southeast coast through Monday. Kind of a just a slack area of really anything. A weak storm to the south, nothing much to the north, so light variable winds, low clouds and fog. Pretty widespread for the Gulf of Alaska. Kind of a northwest breeze there along the coast of roughly at about 10 knots. Inside waters about the same, except for Lynn Canal, looking for those southerlies in the afternoon, kicking up to about 20 knots. You can see a little bit tighter gradient up here across northern Lynn Canal, maybe Glacier Bay. Otherwise, the interior, mostly cloudy, cooler, and more showery, but not a bad day for Cook Inlet and the Susitna Valley again. Madanuska Valley, Kenai Peninsula, mostly dry. More clouds over Prince William Sound, but showers looks like they'll be restricted to the mountainous terrain, Copper River Basin, the Alaska Range, maybe the Talkeetnas. Western Alaska Range, chance of showers down into Bristol Bay. Not too bad to the west there. Another system racing eastward across the Bering Sea. Not all that, doesn't look like it's picked up a whole lot of moisture, but coming across a Bering like that, warm front type weather. Low clouds, fog, drizzle, maybe some light rain. Definitely IFR with a warm front. That'll be extending down across the Pribilofs again into the central Aleutians and sliding into the eastern Aleutians, especially Nikolsky, and later on for Unalaska. Otherwise, the cold front, a weak cold front here, trailing back toward the Komodorsky Islands with just a very narrow band of light rain with that. So the Aleutians looking pretty dry from about Adak westward to Shimia. Possible clearing up to the north, low pressure north of the eastern Arctic coast, a lot of leftover moisture, widespread showers, areas of light rain from the Brooks Range northward to the Arctic coast. Some of that slipping on down into the Kobuk Valley, maybe the northern Koyukuk Valley, but the heaviest precipitation will be north of the mountains up there. And then for temperatures this afternoon across the Panhandle, mostly in the mid to upper 50s, 57 at Klawock, 55. Both at Petersburg and Wrangell, with 56 at the state capital, 61 degrees there at Yakutat, Skagway 57, 73 in Cordova, same thing at Portage, very nice day today, 66 in Seward, and 78-degree reading there at Talkeetna with 76 at Gulkana, mid-70s Tanana Valley, as well as the Yukon Flats, for Yukon at 75, 72 at Eagle, upper 70s here back to the west, with 75 at Galena, and then 81 degrees this afternoon at McGrath, Same time, Nikolai had 82 degrees, which was the warm spot in the state. Otherwise 68 there at Arctic Village, 50 degrees over at Dead Horse, 39 again at Kaktovik, 40s mid to upper for the Arctic coast out to the west, and then into the 50s though, Buckland up to 68, and for down the river valley here, 76. Or that's 79 at Sleepmute, 74 at Bethel, lower to mid 50s along the coast, but Unalakleet up to 68, 55 in Nome, 50 degrees there at St. Paul, 68 at Sand Point, again the south side of the peninsula here, seeing some pretty good sunshine, temperatures rising to near 70 degrees, 50s on the north side with the clouds, 52 in Alaska, Atka, 48 at Adak and at Shemya. Lows for tonight, upper 50s to lower 60s here with the warmest areas up over the Yukon Valley back down toward Fairbanks. Otherwise 50s all the way down to the coastline, mid to upper in some cases, cooler over the eastern Copper River Basin, especially with more elevation. Lower to mid 50s here for the southeast coast, and out in the Aleutians in the 40s. Highs for tomorrow, barely reaching 50 for the forecast high for St. Paul. Otherwise mid 50s there for Unalaska. 50s for the remainder of the Aleutians, 50s lower 60s. Alaska Peninsula again warmest on the south side. Mid 60s, cooler definitely here for the Bristol Bay Area and the Kuskokwim Valley, but still coming up possibly into the lower 70s. And a day much like today there for the eastern interior areas. Cooler, but still probably Talkeetna areas of Sitna Valley, Big Lake, Wasilla. Willow reaching 70 or into the lower 70s tomorrow afternoon. Otherwise 60s on down to the south to Kodiak, lower to mid 60s. So a little bit of a rise there, possibly, hopefully, for the southeast coast. Flying weather tomorrow, IFR lingering over toward the eastern border on up towards the passes in the morning. VFR though, the interior, north slope southward, IFR out along the coast, quite extensive there from the Chukchi Sea and the Arctic coast southward into the Bering Sea. A little bit of a break here toward the central Aleutians, more IFR farther to the west. So tomorrow afternoon, that slips eastward there, more solid area, just catching the Pribilofs again, and IFR into Bristol Bay and Kuskokwim Bay down to the north side of the Alaska Peninsula with marginal VFR central eastern Aleutians. IFR here, all that moisture south side, that's where the heaviest rain will be of the Brooks Range there, and then marginal for the central and western Arctic coast, offshore flow, keeping it maybe VFR on the east side for a while. And then for passes, Anatuvik and Adigan, both VFR tomorrow with Lake Clark and Merrill staying open as well. And then for the Rainy Pass, VFR throughout the day, and windy VFR also with Isabel and Mentasta looking good, although just a slight chance of a thunderstorm there from Mentasta Pass. And for Tanita, VFR either approach, and Portage looking good as well tomorrow, VFR either approach west or east. And then Chokuta White starting out IFR early, gradually improving tomorrow afternoon to marginal, possibly even becoming VFR later in the afternoon on Sunday. For the freezing levels, quite warm out here over the Bering Sea. Had a pretty good upper level ridge there. And late tonight, still 14,000 feet all the way up to St. Matthew Island, 12,000 feet poking up into the Chukchi Sea. Ahead of that next system coming out of the Russian Far East as the old system here exits the area, about 8,000 to 10,000 feet up across the Brooks Range, otherwise 10,000 to 12,000 feet covering central and southern Alaska. Cooler though over the Panhandle, 6,000 to 8,000 feet, that all sliding gradually off to the east, so that'll hopefully helpfully shut the shower activity down at least to a certain extent. And for the icing tomorrow, right along that frontal boundary here, a lot of moisture sliding northeastward and then northward, so possible areas of occasional widespread moderate rime icing, but way up there above 8,000 feet here to the north, above 12,000 feet there on the southern trailing edge. And onto the jet stream, again upper level high centered south and southwest of the western Aleutians, strongly ridging into the central interior there. So north of that ridge, a pretty good southwest jet driving that next system in tomorrow, about 100 knots right across the northern interior there, but the ridge here keeping it dry to the south, and another nice day coming up for 9,000 feet. Pretty good winds here at 9,000 west-southwest, 40 to 45 knots ahead of that frontal system there, with a low off the western Arctic coast, and even up to 20 knots, 20 to 30 knots coming into southern Alaska along the Alaska Range, lighter over the western Aleutians. Same pattern at 3,000 feet here with light winds for the Aleutians, 30 to 40 knots here of the west and northwest interior. Turbulence with that occasional moderate chop. Pretty likely tomorrow below 5,000 feet, central Arctic coast, all the way down across Norton Sound and St. Lawrence Island. And after the break, I'll be back with the marine forecasts. Hello everyone and welcome to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm Jim Peranto. In Alaska, terrain can vary greatly depending on where you're at. From mountainous terrain to low-lying valleys and channeled waterways, Alaska has some of the most extreme terrain features in the world. This has a direct influence on the wind patterns. Today in studio, I have Eric Stevens, who is the Science and Operations Officer at the Fairbanks Forecast Office, and he's going to explain to us the detail of terrain-influenced winds. Welcome back, Eric.
Glad to be here, Jim.
What is meant by terrain-influenced winds?
Well, wind blows because of pressure patterns, and you have broad-scale pressure patterns like high pressure, which should make winds blow in a clockwise direction, low pressure, which makes winds blow in a counterclockwise pressure. You have a couple of H's and L's on a map, so you ought to know what the winds are. But it turns out that that broad-scale pattern will be modified by local terrain. Mountains get in the way. They interrupt this idealized flow around high and low pressure. And the result is that you can have very different winds at specific locations, even though those locations might not be that far apart.
Well, we have a lot of mountains up here in Alaska, more than you can even count, I think. And with that, you must have a lot of terrain-influenced winds in these mountainous regions.
Right. I think there's more terrain-influenced wind in Alaska than not terrain-influenced wind. And this has all kinds of implications in Alaska. Mariners know this. In southeast Alaska, wind tends to blow up and down the channels, not necessarily according to high and low pressure systems in that idealized sense. Alaska Fire Service knows how during the day, even though the pressure pattern on a broad scale is kind of quiet, that winds will tend to blow up valley, up hillside during the afternoon, and then gently come down valley, down hillside in the evenings and overnight. And that's important for them to fight fires. They need to account for that. And people who live in Delta Junction and the Fort Greely area know all about terrain-influenced winds. That's some of the most prominent terrain-influenced winds in the interior.
And they have a jet called?
The Tanana Valley Jet.
All right.
That's a homemade name that we came up with at the Weather Service because we had to deal with this phenomenon so often that it just got a name so we could know what we're talking about more quickly.
So what is the Tanana Valley Jet?
Tanana Valley Jet comes up many times in winter, sometimes in the summertime. It's more common in the winter when there's high pressure in northwestern Canada, say centered over the Yukon Territory, and a low pressure system churning away out there in the Bering Sea. So that's your broad scale weather pattern. But because of the Alaska Range and because of the Yukon-Tanana uplands there and the Tanana River cutting right between those two, when you have high pressure in Canada like that, especially in the winter, if it's Arctic air, cold high pressure, instead of having the wind flow, we should think, from south to north because you have high pressure there and low pressure out west, you should have a south wind. Well, instead, the mountains interfere with that broad idealized flow, with the result being that the air pretty much blows straight from high pressure to low pressure, straight down that Tanana Valley along the river.
So Delta Junction, I mean, they're pretty windy all the time. It seems like it, for me, I mean, when I'm looking at Delta Junction, I mean, it seems like they've always got some sort of wind there, and they get this Tanana Valley Jet. Mm-hmm. Do they also get a Chinook wind? Because that's another wind that we get up here in Alaska. Very familiar with that here in Anchorage. Do they get a Chinook wind as well in Delta Junction?
In Delta, sometimes it can seem like if it's not windy out of one direction, it's windy out of the other one. Tanana Valley Jet is an east-southeast wind going down the river valley. Tends to be a colder wind. But another prominent wind there is that Chinook wind, which instead of going down the Tanana River, comes from the south, out of Isabel Pass in the Alaska Range. A totally different kind of mechanism. To get that Isabel Pass Chinook wind going, the ingredients you need there is a strong jet stream flow. The jet stream, that high altitude river of speedy air coming up from the south, maybe call it the Pineapple Express if it's coming all the way from those lower latitudes around Hawaii, shooting milder air straight north into the Alaska Range. Well, when that air hits the Alaska Range, the jet stream spraying in there, it's like a wall of terrain, the Alaska Range, but there's a couple of notches in the wall. including Isabel Pass. And the DOT put the highway through there because it was a nice convenient low spot. Well, Mother Nature can see that gap too, and so the wind gets concentrated through Isabel Pass, sprays through there, goes by Donnelly Dome, through Fort Greely and into Delta Junction there. That's the Chinook.
And Chinook is a warm wind, so it warms temperatures up too as well in Delta Junction, right?
That's an important difference between the Chinook wind and that Tanana Valley jet. The Tanana Valley jet tends to be a colder wind. In the wintertime, the Chinook can bring temperatures even above freezing up here in interior Alaska, which can be shocking. Even in January, if a good Chinook turns on, it can be above freezing. What's really interesting is when those two wind regimes are almost of equal prominence and they can kind of fight. And in Delta Junction, you can have the Tanana Valley jet being prominent with that east-southeast wind down the river valley, colder wind, temperatures might be 0 and windy or 10 above, kind of on the cold side. And then the wind can snap around to be out of the south and the Chinook turns on and temperatures get up to freezing or even above freezing. But then a couple of hours later, maybe the Tanana Valley jet turns on again. There are very subtle differences in which of those wind patterns will be active, and that's a real forecast issue.
Yeah, that must be hard to forecast for that. How do you write a forecast to sort of, follow those sort of wind patterns and temperature differences throughout the day? That's a tough deal for forecasters. A
meteorologist hopes to find one of the patterns being the predominant one, and you think, well, that one should win out. But it's those cases where each one is equally strong, like having two equally matched prize fighters in the ring, and you can't really tell which one's going to come up with. It's such a close fight. That is a tough one. It's safe to say it'll be windy.
Yes, very windy. You're in Fairbanks. That's where the forecast office is. Delta Junction, to the east. Is there differences there when these kind of wind patterns are going on, or is Fairbanks experiencing that Tanana Valley jet or the Chinook wind? What's going on with the two cities?
That's a very reasonable question because Tanana Valley jet, well, Fairbanks is near the Tanana River. Fairbanks is north of the Alaska Range. Chinooks, Tanana Valley jets should affect Fairbanks as well. And Fairbanks can get windy, but it's not like Delta. We find that even though they are on the broad scale at first glance similar, that Delta is closer to the Alaska Range, it's closer to the opening of the mouth of the Tanana River there, and they're more exposed to those winds. You learn this the hard way by having to forecast it and see what happens. And the fact is that even though by Alaska standards, Fairbanks and Delta are pretty close to each other, about 100 miles apart. In Alaska, that's not much. Both interior, got some mountains around there. You'd think they'd be similar. But Fairbanks in the wintertime especially, turns out hardly ever very windy. Fairbanks is trapped under that temperature inversion, very quiet air, where Delta, it's not windy every day in Delta, but they're windy many days in the wintertime. The overall lesson here is even though we have broad weather systems that affect entire parts of the state, because of the terrain modifying that broad circulation, you get very particular results at just one location as opposed to another one. Even though they're pretty close to each other, that's terrain-influenced winds. And that's what we call a microclimate too. A microclimate is the result of local terrain modifying the impact of broad-scale weather systems. Alaska has a lot of terrain, and Alaska has a lot of microclimates.
Well, thank you for coming in today and talking to us about terrain-influenced winds. It's been a great experience, Eric.
Hey, it's been my pleasure, and thank you for the time.
You're welcome. And thank you for joining us here on Alaska Weather Facts. Until next time.
Welcome back. Pretty light winds, light and variable here on the south coast. Otherwise, north coast, same thing, but more southwest in the direction. Seas just 5 to 6 feet. Inside waters, about the same story, south to southeast. Only 10 knots, 2-foot seas, pretty slight. Northern Canal, though, coming up to 20 knots in the afternoon, seas building to 4 feet. That holds through Monday as well up in that area. Otherwise, still kind of a light variable wind pattern going on here for the central and southern inside waters with slight seas. Northwest at 10, seas just 4 feet here the entire length of the coast, although wind direction more westerly at 10 to 15. Prince William Sound tomorrow, light variable winds are out of the east at 10, light variable winds north Gulf Coast, southwest 20 Kodiak Island, small craft advisories out for Cook Inlet, southerlies 25 knots, 6 to 8 foot seas, highest south of the Forelands. Monday, southerlies at 20, 4 to 5 foot seas, so coming down a little bit there, but 20 knot winds Kodiak Island. No change North Gulf Coast or Prince William Sound with light variable winds, 2 to 3 foot seas. Bristol Bay, west 15 tomorrow. Otherwise, the other zones variable at 10 or less with 3 to 5 foot seas. Next day, Monday, southwest 15 to 20 now here north of the peninsula into Bristol Bay, but no change on the south side, Cape Sarachef to Sitkinak, variable at 10. Eastern Aleutians tomorrow, west-southwest or so, 15 knots, up to 15 to 20 from the southwest, and then 20 knotters there, west of Adak to Shemya. And for Monday, west-southwest, 15 to 20 about sums it up with seas 4 to 6 feet, and that's about it. So no small craft advisories. Small craft advisories tomorrow for the southwest coast here and the Pribilofs. 30-knot winds, northern Bering Sea, St. Lawrence Island, south to southwest, seas 9 to 11 feet. Lighter the next day, west 15 for the Pribilofs, southwest 15 to 20 here, everywhere else. And up along the Arctic coast, easterlies 15 to 20 knots for the central and east side. Southerlies 20 knots here for the western coast, and 30-knot winds from Wales to Cape Thompson. And then light winds, southwest 15 for that area, light westerlies central west side at 15 knots, west-southwest still at 20 knots, and seas 4 feet for the eastern Beaufort Sea coastline. And for tonight again, that front keeping it damp, but the winds definitely lighter than they were earlier today up there. Next system coming in, more wind and rain with it, sliding into St. Lawrence Island, across the Seward Peninsula up to the northwest coast. Otherwise, no change over the interior. Fair conditions, light winds, less showers of the Panhandle, even less tomorrow with maybe more sunshine. Another nice day, south central Alaska. North Gulf Coast, Copper River Basin into the eastern interior, but rain and wind here back to the west from the Yukon Delta and northwest of the Kobuk Valley, western Brooks Range, southern slopes will see the heaviest precipitation. And then for Monday, that system weakens with a lot of leftover moisture there, keeps it wet and cloudy with IFR along the Arctic coast. Otherwise, a mostly dry day for the Panhandle. Mostly cloudy, cooler scattered showers, central southern interior. Another system, more moisture sliding in across the northern Bering Sea for more wet conditions. Winds not nearly as strong as with the next one coming in, and warm front type weather to the eastern Aleutians. Have a great evening.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.